right, we're back. Holy cow. You know, Joseph was right. Let's make sure I got sound. Yeah, I got sound. Summers are weird. Summers are weird. I like summers. They're great. You can get a 16-week semester done in 12 weeks. But then there's all these holidays and so on and so forth. So it's like, oh my gosh, sometimes you meet, sometimes you don't. But luckily, we've got everything on Canvas. You guys have been responsive on Canvas. So that is fantastic. So welcome back. I'm looking forward to connecting up with everyone again and loading up these points. All right. Hey, let's go ahead and show you what we're going to be doing today. We're going to push this button. We'll push that button first. Hey, you recognize this? This is the communications, what do I call it? The communications life cycle. And we talked last time, 2 weeks ago. So you can totally be forgiven for forgetting 2 weeks ago. And I mean that. Yeah, so much has happened since then, right? So you can be forgiven for 2 weeks ago. So let me give you a quick reminder with purpose. Everything starts with purpose. And in fact, you guys in your teams right now, you are putting together your purpose statements for your strategic communications campaign because it always starts with purpose. Remember, we don't communicate. We don't say a thing or express a thing or gesticulate or anything without a purpose. And you guys have already been doing this in the chat. You know, Brittany chimes in and says good morning and gives some fun jazz hands. And then Joseph says, hey, man, it's been a while. Ben says, come on, let's go. You guys are expressing your presence. You're expressing your engagement. And you are trying to influence me to say you're ready. And I, in turn, am trying to influence you to say, let's do this thing, right? So remember, there's always a purpose in our communication. Sometimes we know the purpose. Sometimes we don't know the purpose. You remember all that. Okay. So you know what? That then says, all right, so we start with purpose. That's fantastic. You decide the purpose in your communication. But then your purpose decides the audience. Okay? You don't decide the audience. Your purpose decides the audience. The example that I gave 2 weeks ago that you forgot, because 2 weeks, holy hell, was, hey, if you want to borrow a car, that's your purpose. So you want to borrow a car. Hey, Beth, or I think it's Lizzie, Isabel, I forget which one you go by, Bethzabel, I think you go by Lizzie. I don't remember. Yeah, Brittany, now you're starting to remember, right? So you guys are getting there, right? So if you want to borrow a car, there are 8 billion people from whom you can borrow a car. Actually, not 8 billion people. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Not all of them have a car. But if your purpose is, I want to borrow a car, that purpose right away turns 8 billion people into about 5. You can borrow a car from parents, siblings, friends, maybe a coach, if you're on good terms with a coach, right? Something like that, okay? So your purpose decides your audience. Now, audience, everyone focus right here. Audience is the most important aspect of a communications plan. When you guys do your communications plan, you're going to be, the vast majority of that plan is going to be an audience analysis. And so for the next 2 weeks, today, aujourd'hui, semaine prochaine, the next week, we are going to talk about audience. So 2 weeks dedicated to audience because it's that important and it's that in depth. All right. So today we're covering kind of the basics of audience, although we're actually going to, just because of the way summer is set up, we're going to stray a little bit into the deeper aspects of audience. But then next week we get deeper still, okay? So, audience, the most important part of a communications campaign. And let's come over here. There we go. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is something called demographics. Demographics. And as it says right here, I get mixed up. I got 4 monitors going here. Demographics, characteristics that are easy to immediately observe and measure. It is really easy to observe and measure demographics. Okay? I know, right? Joseph, he's such a cute Frenchie. Oh, I love my Frenchie. We have like 3 dogs, and that one's Dozer. Dozer's the Frenchie. So, things that are demographics. This is age, race, gender, ethnicity, education, economic circumstance. It is really easy to observe and measure demographics. So, for instance, if we look at me, this is me right here. I'm old, I'm white, I'm a cis male. My ethnicity is Germanic and Scottish, German on one side, Scottish on the other. My education is a PhD, and economic circumstance, I have enough money to afford a Frenchie. Frenchies aren't cheap, okay? So, yes, precious baby, that's my baby. So those are my demographics. And you can easily see that. I mean, a few of you have met me in person. Joseph, you've been in a class with me. I think maybe 1 or 2 of you. Brittany, we've never met in person, but you've been in class. But even right now, you go, well, the dude's old. He's white. He's married with kids, so you can kind of assume a cis male. Germanic, Scottish, pretty easy to see. You know I have a PhD, and since there's a Frenchie in the picture, you know my economic circumstances are such that I can afford a Frenchie. Okay. Now, those are demographics, all right? But demographics don't really tell us much. Hold on. Hang on. The thing we really care about are psychographics, okay? Psychographics. Psychographical traits that direct and justify how a person lives, thinks, and behaves, okay? Energy, forget the age. I'll take that, right? So here's the thing about psychographics. When we remember, the purpose of communication is to affect and influence the attitudes, values, and behavior of others and ourselves for a specific objective, right? Remember, my purpose right now is to get you fired up about this topic and to teach you. Right? Your purpose right now is to demonstrate to me that you're engaging with me and that you are in fact paying attention so that you can get the points and we can feed off each other, right? So now, Brittany, you just forecasted my question. Who here, just tell me, and just type it in real quick. Brittany, you're already in. Who here has heard of demographics? Yes, demographics. But have you heard of psychographics? So just type in real quick if you've heard of psychographics before. And trust me, there's a reason for this. Okay, so Brittany, you haven't heard of psychographics before. I know you've heard demographics. Everybody has heard demographics. Okay, so Anthony, I've heard of demographics, but not the other. It's so pain in the ass to type, so I like the way you've done that. Demographics, yes. Psychographics, no. Yes on demographics, no on psychographics. You guys are really demonstrating something key here. Okay? I like Godzilla. Okay. Godzilla -1, incredible movie if you haven't seen it. It's now on, I think, Netflix, so if you want to Netflix it, you can. Okay. Now here's the thing, people. And I really mean this. You've all heard of demographics, but demographics by themselves are useless. Hold on, and we're going to come back to that. Psychographics are where it's at, okay? Psychographics, yes, no on psychographics. There we go. Psychographics matter more than anything. And yet we've never heard of psychographics, or at least very rarely heard of psychographics. By the way, if any of you have heard the term psychographics before, it was probably in a marketing class, because marketing talks about psychographics a great deal. Well, now, here's the reason we don't hear about psychographics. They're hard to observe and measure. All right? So here we want to influence people. But to influence them, we need to get to know them. You can't just influence somebody, influence their attitudes, value, or behavior if you don't know what makes them tick, right? And that's psychographics, but psychographics are really hard to observe and measure. And so this is where demographics come into play, but in a backdoor way. I'll show you what I mean. By the way, let's see, Brittany has a term, psychographics, a new term. And no, psychographics have been around forever and ever and ever. Yeah, I studied psychographics when I was a journalism major 40 years ago or something, 30 years ago. It seems like noticing demographics can give us some clues about psychographics, assumptions, getting... Okay. First of all, the question from Brittany. But then, Anthony, you get 2 freaking light bulbs because you're seeing where this is going. All right? Check this out. All right. Demographics as a back door to psychographics. This is what we tend to do. So let me read this, but we need to think about this carefully. When trying to understand someone you don't know, demographics may provide a framework for generating some initial assumptions. Now, if this sounds like stereotyping, it is. Now, stereotyping comes with really, really bad baggage, right? We think negative when we think stereotyping, but that's stereotyping. Stereotyping is not good or evil. It is amoral. It's how we use it. Stereotyping can be a helpful way to initiate a social interaction, but an awful way to pass judgment on these interactions or individuals. Let me explain. We use stereotyping all the time, okay? All the time. It is a way that we initiate a conversation. When you walk up to a cashier or when you talk to me in the hallway before you met me or anything, you assume that I speak English. You just make that assumption. And that's a pretty valid assumption. I was born in the United States, and I'm a teacher at Salt Lake Community College. It's a good assumption that I speak English. However, I grew up in England as well as the United States, but also France and also Japan. So I speak French and Japanese, but you're kind of like, dude, look at him. He speaks English, right? We stereotype all the time, okay? Now, that's fine for initiating a connection. We have to start somewhere, so we start at the kind of assumed things. And that's good. That's actually really good. That way we can initiate relationships and connections very, very, very quickly. That's a good use of a stereotype. The wrong use of a stereotype is to say, I don't even need a connection. I already know everything about you. So why bother getting to know you and ask questions when clearly I already know everything about you based on your demographics? That's the wrong kind of stereotype, okay? So let me show you what I mean. We're going to play with me for a moment. All right, by the way, to form an accurate and fair judgment about others, it's important to go beyond the stereotypes and delve into individual experiences, values, and unique characteristics. This is the psychographics. People are more than just the sum of their group memberships, and using stereotypes as the basis for a final judgment, this is a problem. So, we're going to get some light bulbs because we're going to do this with me. All right. So, remember, based on my demographics, I'm an old, white, cis male, Germanic, Scottish background, PhD with enough money to buy a Frenchie, to own a Frenchie and take care of a Frenchie, okay? So based on this, use these stereotypes. Give me some of my psychographics, okay? Give me something around my lifestyle. What do I do with my time? What am I interested in? My behaviors? What do you think are some of my habits? What do you think are some of my opinions based simply on the demographics or tastes and attitudes? So go ahead and play with this. Let's go ahead and throw some. By the way, you're totally. I hate it when professors say, which is what I was about to say, you're totally safe. Because it's like, dude, I don't know you. So what do you mean I'm totally safe? But you're safe. Anthony, I'm a dog person. Yes, you can observe that, right? And so what's a dog person like? What's kind of their thoughts and opinions and so forth? But you're right, I'm a dog person. Obsessed with your yard and gardening. This is correct. Okay, this is a stereotype. If you're an old white male in Utah, you're probably obsessed with your garden and with yards and so forth. And this is correct. This is where you can correctly ascertain a psychographic because of a demographic. All right. By the way, you should be getting these bad boys. Spend a lot of time with your grandchildren. Okay, now check this out. I don't have grandchildren. And I don't really want grandchildren. Okay, so now hold on, sports fans. This is an old white male, cis male in Utah, and he doesn't have grandchildren and doesn't want grandchildren. That flies in the face of his demographics. You would not assume that. And while we're not going to go into the detail right now, you now have something about me that you're kind of like, oh, really? That seems odd based on the stereotype. Tell me more. So you used a demographic, a stereotype, to initiate an assumption. You learn that that assumption is wrong, and it gives you an opportunity to connect and learn more about the person. You see how that works? Spend time, let's see, enjoy watching something. Bird watching. Actually, I'm not into bird watching, but I do try to attract birds to my yard. So yeah, I'll give that a pass. Yes. Great attitude, cup half full. By the way, we're going to do our next one. Great attitude, cup half full. I will simply say that I am a I'm a nihilist by nature. I'm an existentialist by design. So, in other words, I do have a good attitude and my cup is half full, but that's more of a survival mechanism than who I am deep down. I don't know. So I'd love to have that conversation. You see? You see how this, let's just run through the others. Let's see. Based on that and what I know, I'd assume you're a highly educated young boomer. I'm a Gen X, but we're going to talk about generations today, by the way. Republican, let's see, deal with when it comes to social rights, who would be difficult to deal with at social rights. Okay. So yes, based on old white cis male in Utah, it is statistically a given that Republican, right? No. And furthermore, when it comes to like social rights and so forth, here's demographic information that you do not know. I was raised in California in the first few years of my life, first, second, into third grade. I was raised in California in a hippie commune. Okay, now that's different than old white cis male in Utah. We now have old hippie commune dude. Now, you're going to think Republican who doesn't go for social rights? No, right? So yeah, okay. Let's see here. We'll just finish these up. I'd also assume you're a Christian, extremely conservative. That would be a valid assumption, but no, not super conservative. Kind of the other way. Wife and kids, yes. Drive a nice vehicle, sports car. I'm actually working on a classic in my garage. So yes, right? Yeah, live in a hippie communes rock. It was quite an experience. Okay. So you guys get it. Okay, you guys get it. Psychographics are where it's at. We want to know the psychographics. But since they're hard to observe and measure, we use demographics as a backdoor. But be careful when you do that. Be careful that you're using it as a way to initiate a relationship, not decide and judge a relationship without getting to know the person. Okay? All right. Here we go. Now, part of psychographics and demographics are our ethnicity, where we were raised, what our nationality is, and so forth. Now, here's the thing real quick. And I'm going to come over here for a moment. Just talk here for a second. This is important because we all work in international organizations. Today, working anywhere, there's an aspect of international. So, for example, and you don't have to answer this. It's totally up to you, right? But let me know if you were born in a different country than the United States, okay? So, again, if you're not comfortable sharing that, don't. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to demonstrate something to you. Now, while you're deciding whether or not to answer born in a different country, I was born in the United States. I lived part of my teenage years in the UK, and I spent a year in France as a student, and born in New Jersey. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm just messing with you. And then also worked in Japan for a couple years. And so I've been all over the place, and I've worked in many, many international organizations. And now Sarah, we see, was born in the Philippines. Okay? So now I got news for you. Even being a student at little podunk Salt Lake Community College. I exaggerate to make the point. Zimbabwe. Okay, Zimbabwe. Fantastic. Even this group right now, you, us, right, this group is an international group. And it's everywhere you go, international is everywhere. So international is not the exception. International is the norm. And so if international is the norm, it bears taking some time to learn how different cultures think. What are their psychographics? So what we're going to do here now is talk about the psychographics of various cultures, all right? Now, as we do so, I will be sharing where I have lived and worked and where I have grown up, so I can show you, well, these are the psychographics that were in these areas and where I picked up this, that, and the other, and so forth. But feel totally free. If you grew up in another country, or if you lived in another country for a couple of years, or if your parents are from another country, feel free to kind of say, hey, this is what we see in this country, and so on and so forth. Okay? Yeah. So Utah, culture shock, yes. And we're actually going to talk about culture shock. We're going to talk about culture shock today. Okay. All right. Let's talk about low context and high context communication. And we're going to come over here. I want to start with this because, frankly, born in Mexico. You see? International organization. We are an international group even here right now. Okay. Low context and high context. I want to talk about this because I feel that for me, this has been the most difficult concept of communication to understand. I have really had to study and think about this a lot to get it. Now, I think all of us kind of have like these mind blocks. So most of the time I can look at an idea and get it pretty darn quickly. But for some reason, I really had to work through this. And I don't think it's because it's necessarily a difficult concept. It's just because I had to work through it. Okay, so with that. By and large, and this little graph down here kind of shows different countries where they are in terms of high context versus low context and so forth. By and large, different cultures run along this context continuum. Let's start with low context. We're going to start with low context because the USA, America, tends to be low context. If we look at this little chart down here, we see that Switzerland, Germany, USA, these are low context countries, okay? So what's low context mean? Well, low context cultures, when it comes to communication, tend to be very logical, linear, and individualistic, and action-oriented. Now, before I go on, I should probably say, what's the difference between low and high? It's diversity in the population. Let me show you what I mean, and then I'll continue with the explanation. If you look at Switzerland, Germany, and USA, these are very diverse populations, okay? So when I lived in France, I used to go to Switzerland a fair amount. And in Switzerland, everybody speaks 4 languages. And there's people from Germany and France and England and Brussels and Switzerland and Austria. I mean, there's just a lot of diversity in Switzerland. The USA, we have a ton of diversity here. Hell, look at our list of students. We are an extremely diverse population in this class alone, right? So we have a lot of diversity. On the other hand, countries like Japan and the Arab countries, I used to live in Japan, there's hardly any diversity at all in Japan. It's a country that we would call homogeneous, just one type of person. So it was really strange when you're walking around Japan, if you would see another, say, European American, we call them gaijin. If you'd see another gaijin, you'd be like, oh my gosh, or in China, if you see a Kuai Lo, right? They stand out so much because everybody is Japanese, all right? Same with, say, some of the Arabian countries and so forth. Latin America starts to get more toward the middle. Okay, so think about diversity here, all right? Let's see, Utah is far less diverse than New Jersey. Yeah, no doubt. More, less diverse than New Jersey. But, United States in general, pretty diverse. Japanese look at immigrants as second citizens. Yes, I was in Japan for a couple of years. I can attest to this. Okay, so back to low context. Low context, communication is clear, direct, and informative. You say what you mean what you say. It can feel over-explained to high context people. So now, here's the thing. Here's the overriding concept to embrace. When everybody is different, you don't have a lot of shared cultural experience and norms to draw upon to communicate. So in low context cultures where there's not a lot of shared context between all the different people, we talk in very direct, specific, linear ways because it's almost like we're speaking a foreign language to each other because we don't have that shared meaning. We're going to go back and forth on some of these slides. On the other hand, in a high context culture, right? By the way, Brittany, you're right on both Japan and South Korea. Their birth rates are really plummeting. So yes. Okay, a high context culture, this is where everybody is the same. You know what I mean? Nobody's the same. But we're talking about Japan, the Arabian countries, and so forth, where everybody shares. Everybody is, I don't like to say things in the absolutes, but you understand what I'm saying. Everybody shares the culture. Everybody shares the history. Everybody shares a common cultural understanding. Therefore, in a high context culture, communication is formal language loaded with implied meaning, cannot be understood outside the context of the situation. And so they kind of, work within the bounds of the context and so forth. Now, let me give you an example of how we do this even in a low context culture. One time, a former coworker of mine and now a professor at Salt Lake Community College, her name is Penny. She and I worked together at Intel Corporation. And at Intel, she was my boss. And we worked for an organization called OCAC, Online Connect Assistance. I don't know. OCAC meant something, right? And so she and I worked many, many years in OCAC, and we built the organization from nothing to an idea to infancy to now a fully grown organization. Okay, great. Well, like 10 years later, she's still working for Intel. I'm not working for them anymore, but Penny hires me on as a contractor. She wants my help in building a new group, a new department at Intel. Okay, great. So we're on the airplane together, and the idea is she's going to spend this flight time explaining to me the new group, their needs, what they want to accomplish, things like this. And she starts out, she says, think OCAC 5 years ago. And right away, just saying, think of OCAC 5 years ago, I immediately had probably an hour and a half of information stuffed into my head because she and I shared that cultural context, that experience and that context of Intel. Now, if I were to say to you, well, it's kind of like OCAC 5 years ago, you'd say that is meaningless to me. I have no idea what you're talking about. Whereas when I heard it, it was an hour and a half of information. This is why we say with high context communication cannot be well understood outside the context of the situation. So as I say here, it can feel underexplained to low context people. So this is the difference between high context and low context. I tend to be a low context communicator, and so I am often over-explaining, going over the same thing over and over to try to make sure you understand. And that means half of you as students are like, Lon, we get it. Shut the holy hell up. Fine, I get it. But I'm like, yeah, but not everybody shares that context. I really need to make sure that everyone gets it. It can feel really over-explained to a high context communicator. Okay? So, yeah, like I say, it takes me a little bit to process that. There's another thing that we look at when it comes to people's psychographics, their attitudes toward things. We call this, hey, some of us need extra clarity. Yeah, totally. M time versus P time. All right, let me explain this. First, we have monochromatic time, M time. All right. This is dominant in low context cultures, such as the United States. Low context cultures like Germany, Switzerland, United States tend to see time as something to be parsed out, measured, and managed. After all, time is money. So we're super psyched. Check it out. In this live stream, you see this little countdown clock. You know that it starts at 8 a.m. and there's a little countdown clock that says it's about to start, and then it says starts now, and then we start. This is totally M time. This is Lon being very M time, monochromatic time, because he tends to be a low context communicator and is a product of this sort of Western, culture, Europe and US and so forth. On the other hand, we have P time, okay, which is polychromatic time. I can't even pronounce it. This tends to be dominant in high context cultures. Time is something to be savored and interested and invested in building and strengthening of relationships. This cannot be neatly divided into 15-minute increments. Okay, so let me give you some examples. If some of you, and I believe Sarah has, if any of you are either from or are part of or have lived in Latin American countries, Central America, South America, and so forth, here's a question I have for you. And the answer is what you think it is. Let's say that you have a business meeting with somebody. You're going to go see a client. You're going to go see some business person, right? What are you going to talk about for the first 10 or 15 minutes? That's all I'm going to ask. If you understand Latin American culture because South America, Central America, because you were born there or raised there or your parents were, or you lived there for some reason or another, and you're meeting with somebody, what do you talk about for the first 10 or 15 minutes? Now, I'll go on and tell a story after and while that's coming on up. let's talk about like the Arabian countries and so forth. Arabian countries tend to be pea time, meaning in many cases, I'm checking what the next slide was there. It's appropriate to be late. Whereas in the United States, it's kind of considered rude and inappropriate to be late, and it's best to be either on time or early. My philosophy is that if you're 10 minutes early, you're on time. And if you're on time, you're late. So you notice that my live streams start 10 minutes early, and that's why I have the counter, because I think in M time. On the other hand, P time people are like, no, you go ahead and show up maybe 20 minutes late, maybe half an hour late, maybe an hour late. That is the appropriate thing to do. It seems weird to me, but that's because I'm a product of this. Now, I'm not seeing many answers here, so I'll go ahead and jump in. Latin American countries, when you're doing business there and so forth. Hang on, here we go. Oh, by the way, Zimbabwe, we would start talking about how their morning is, how their family is, and their children and their dog, and whether it's exactly. I have a former coworker that I'm hoping to work with again from Costa Rica. And whenever you meet, you spend the first 10 or 15 minutes talking about family. That is like requisite, all right? South America, Latin America, Central America, and then apparently Zimbabwe. You spend the first few minutes, 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes, talking about family. It's that important because time is something to be invested in relationships. Whereas in America, Germany, Switzerland, and so forth, it's like, get to business. Oh my gosh, physically cringe when I'm late, causes me physical pain. Yes, me too. More of a get to know you first interaction. Exactly, Sarah. Very well put. My coworker, Penny, who I told you about, I am very close to Penny. She and I have been business partners, co-employees. She's been my boss and so on and so forth for going on to 2 decades, more than 2 decades. We started a business together. We really enjoyed that. And yet every single time we meet, we get right to business. And then one time we were going into a meeting and she said, don't you think we ought to ask how each other's doing and our family and stuff? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And so we did. And that was really awkward. Really awkward. Now, when we meet socially, we'll catch up on those things and so forth. So if we're having dinner together, and all that sort of stuff, we meet socially, we catch up on that stuff. But when it comes to the business meeting, it's straight into business. Steffi or Lizzie, boy, tell me which name, I forget. I know you told me. High or low context varies state to state in Mexico. There's places where everything moves so fast and others where conversations seem to be in slow motion. I did not know that. I would say that this is the same for the United States. In New York, things are going. But I went to school. I did my bachelor's degree in the South, Memphis, Tennessee. And in the South, things are much more chill and lackadaisical and so forth. I did not know that about Mexico. Very cool. Okay, here's the next thing that is unique. And again, all of this points to psychographics, people. All of this points to psychographics, how we think and communicate and how to influence folks and so forth and how to be influenced. That's also true. Yeah, right? in terms of the South and New York. Okay, pace of life. I'm going to tell you a little story, pace of life. So when I was living in England, one New Year's, we spent New Year's in Scotland, okay? My mother's family is from Scotland, and so we went to visit the homeland and so forth. I'm 13 years old, and I fell in love with Scotland. Oh my gosh, I fell in love with Scotland. And so I decided right then and there, I wanted to retire in Scotland. 13 years old, and I'm already thinking, that's it. I want to move to Scotland. I want to retire in Scotland. Okay. Fast forward 20 years or so. I don't know. Something like that. And I'm telling my father-in-law I want to retire in Scotland. And he says, you know what? Why? Why Scotland? And I said, oh, man, let me tell you, when I was there, everybody was chill and relaxed, and no one was in a hurry, and nobody was really anxious. It was all good and lackadaisical. It was a nice, steady pace of life. And he looked at me and said, you would be miserable. And I thought about it, and I thought, damn it, he's right. And so I've actually, since the last decade of my life, I've really worked on becoming more chill, because I lived my life at this insane level of do it. And I started to realize that maybe that's not healthy for me. And so I try to spend more time in my garden and my yard, right, Joseph? Like you pointed out, okay? You place a birth of golf. That's right, Joseph. You're the golf guy. That's right. Ooh, check it out. Oh, man, you guys made it through that one. And we're going to add more. Oh, my gosh. Crazy. Okay, so pace of life. There was this interesting little study done where somebody looked at, okay, how fast people walk downtown, how long it takes to complete a transaction at the post office, and accuracy of public clocks. These were the three things they looked at. Now, whether or not this study, the results are meaningful or not, I don't know, but it's interesting. The theory that this researcher had is that if people walk fast downtown, and they can get through a post office in no time, lickety-split, and public clocks are really accurate, then that means there's a high pace of life. Whereas if people are strolling and you can just talk in a post office and no big deal, and public clocks, who cares about public clocks, whether they're accurate or not, then that would mean a slower pace of life. Now, this is their theory. I do not know, right? But I thought it was interesting to share it. In order of the top three and the bottom three, and then where the United States is, it went in terms of fast pace of life, Switzerland, Germany, Japan. Well, I'll tell you what, I visited Switzerland many times, and I used to live in Japan. And I can tell you their pace of life is psycho fast. Yeah, okay. The bottom three, bottom meaning just a chill pace of life, doesn't mean hierarchy, just chill, is Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico. Now, I have been to Mexico, but it was on a vacation. And you can't really gauge pace of life when you're on vacation because you yourself are on vacation, right? So I can't speak to that. However, notice the United States was like bang in the middle, right in the middle. And that kind of confuses me a little bit because I'm like, I think the United States is actually a lot more anxious about time than that suggests. We walk fast downtown, but it takes forever to get through a post office, and we hate that. And so I don't know that that's pace of life. I think that that's the United States does not like to invest in like government agencies like a post office. So I don't know that that's indicative of pace of life. And accuracy of public clocks, I don't think anybody cares because they've got their own clock with them all the time. So this is me challenging the outcome of that study. Nevertheless, it communicates something that we need to think about, which is that not everybody is like on it, right? We notice this with our teams, right? Your teams are coming together right now. Some of you, like me, some of you are like, we got to get on this now. We got to get on this now. And others are like, it's all good. We've got plenty of time. Don't stress. And when these two things come to blows, it's frustrating. This is why understanding audience psychographics is so important. Okay? Let's keep going with international. Going to talk about cultural values now that affect communication. Let's see, you know what? We are 8:50. I think it is time for a stretch break. Okay? Let's have a stretch break. Just as a reminder, only start to stress when it's Tuesday, right, Brittany? Yeah. As a reminder, we're about halfway through the class. I want to, you guys are sitting around. I get it. So let's get up and stretch a little bit. If you need to run to the bathroom, run to the bathroom. We're going to take a couple of minutes here. If you want to go get a snack, get a snack. Go get a caffeine, get a caffeine. You want to find a dog and bring it to your lap, you're good. In the meantime, I'm going to show you something from my shelf. So here we go. Oh, all right. Here we go. A skull model. There we go. That I put a candle stuff on. So here's the story behind this. When I was a kid growing up in the Bay Area, there was a show late night on Saturday. Back then, there were only 3 channels, right? 4 if you include UHF. There was a late night show called Creature Features, hosted by Bob Wilkins. And as the name would imply, there we go. As the name would imply with Creature Features, he would show old B horror movies. That's what he would do, old B horror movies. And so every Saturday night, I'd stay up till 11 watching old B horror movies and falling asleep while I was watching them, right? Well, Bob Wilkins had in his set, because he was the host, right? So think Elvira and Joe Bob Briggs, and I'm aging myself real quick. He had on his table next to him this skull with the candle thing. And so I thought, I need to make one of those. And so as a kid, I did, and it was really awesome and cool, and I loved it. But then, of course, I lost it because you move away and your dad throws away stuff and so forth. So I wanted another one. So I actually made this one probably about 30 years ago. And every Halloween, I bring this out, put a new candle on it and so forth, and just kind of have that there as my memory of Creature Features and my love of old B horror movies. I still like old B horror movies, but I can't really watch them that much because my wife isn't into them. But I still sneak one in every once in a while. So, yeah, there's my skull candle. I love it. Okay. Put that back there. All right. Good. Let's see here. Chud. Chud's a great one. Yes. Let's see. I forget what Chud stood for. Something humanoid, underground dwellers. Something like, something underground, humanoid underground dwellers. Basically creatures that lived in the sewers. That was Chud. Yeah, those B movies are just fun. If you're into B movies and so forth, a couple of YouTube channels I would recommend. One is Brandon Tenold. I really like his channel. I'll write it in here. Brandon Tenold has a great, funny review show of YouTube channel of mostly B movies and Turkish knockoffs and so forth. And then I also like, let's see, right? Oh, hold on. Well, I mistyped it, but Red Letter Media. Red Letter Media, they don't do just B horror movies. They do B movies in general. They're a little bit more of an acquired taste. Brandon Tenold you can move right into, but Red Letter Media, more of an acquired taste. Took me a while to kind of get on their wavelength. Okay, let's keep going. So, continuing on with culture. There's this cool thing out there called Hofstede's Framework. This thing has been around for a long time, and it has actually proven to be pretty darn robust. Now, to tell you the story of Hofstede's Framework, I think I might be kind of misremembering some of it, but the overall vibe of the story is correct. Hofstede, I don't know if he was Swedish. I think Hofstede might be Swedish. I don't know. But he worked for, I think it was IBM. And he said, you know what, we need to better understand our employees and how they think and so on and so forth. And IBM was this great big, huge, still is, mega company all over the world. And so he did this little research thing to kind of figure out how different IBM employees around the world, how they think, their psychographics. Well, since then, he expanded it on to pretty much the whole world, and now his son has picked up the reins, and he does it. And like I say, it has proven to be pretty darn robust. So like that pace of life study, I'm not totally sold on the outcome of that. I'm dubious of the methodology and assumptions of that study. This one's pretty darn solid, okay? So now, Hofstede's framework says, all right, we're going to measure people along measure cultures, along 6 different continua. Power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, indulgence, okay? And we're going to look at each one of these. In each one of them, we're going to have this, which is the United States, right? So you can see the whole United States. Maybe I'll get down like this, right? This way you can see the United States, and then we're going to see other countries where I have lived or worked, and we can juxtapose them and so forth. Okay? All right. So first one is power distance. Now, power distance is the degree to which people in a country accept that power in institutions and organizations is not distributed equally. Okay? So, for example, you don't have that much power. You don't have that much power. Power resides with government and money. And you're not in the government and you don't have much money. Therefore, you don't have a lot of power. Sure, you can vote, but with our electoral system, now I'm just saying this to make a point, okay? Given our electoral system, electoral college and so forth, your vote doesn't really count. You could go ahead and write an email to your representative. Good luck with that. Unless you're in the government in a position of power, or unless you have money or a corporation or lobbyists, you don't have that much power. How comfortable are you with that? Okay? That's the question that power distance asks. Well, the United States is at about 40, which means I don't really like it. I'll learn to cope, but I don't like it. But it just is what it is. That's what 40 says. Well, Israel is at 100. Israel does not like that at all. Just about every Israeli that I've ever met thinks that they're in charge of everything. Okay? By the way, I really like, I'll tell you stories in a moment. Malaysia, though, Malaysia is a monarchy, and they're kind of like, yeah, of course. Power is distributed unequally. That's not a big deal. What do you mean? So, where would this matter in terms of an organization? Well, let's say I've come to terms with it, right? Yeah, and Brittany, you as well. Let me tell you a story. So I'm in Malaysia. I'm working in Malaysia, and I have a team of people, and I'm trying to lead them and so forth, and they're like, yeah, sure, great, fantastic. They never challenge me. They never question me. They never disagree with me. And yet they don't always do as I ask. And I'm always confused because, well, hell, we just had a meeting and you said, yes, I understand, and yes, I'll do it that way, and then you go off and do it a different way. Well, that's because they know they don't have power and they can't challenge me, and it's kind of rude to challenge the authority and so forth. And so they just do it the way they're going to do it. And they don't want me to lose face by challenging me in front of other people. And so they're fine with it. On the other hand, I'm working with a bunch of Israelis at Intel. I'm still good terms, well, friends, I should say, with a few of them. And I'm on a project, and I'm leading this project. And every single thing I say, the Israelis immediately challenge, and they disagree, and they're in my face. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these people hate me. They think I am just the personification of incompetence. No. It's just that's how these people worked. They would challenge everything. And I consider myself close friends with these people now, okay? And so it's just the way we approach things given how we feel about power. Different cultures behave in different ways. And who you're allowed to marry and so forth? Yeah. Sometimes things just need to be fought, right, Brittany? I'm with you. Okay, let's continue on. Next one is individualism versus collectivism. Now, for the United States, well, let's read the definition first, right? The degree to which people prefer to act as individuals rather than as members of a group and believe in individual rights above all else. Okay. The United States is at 91. The United States is the most individualistic country in all the countries surveyed in Hofstede, and the majority of countries are surveyed in Hofstede. No country is more individualistic, which means that, well, we'll do a compare and contrast, okay? The other country I have here, I think, is China. China is very collectivist, okay? Collectivism, collectivist, they are all about what is best for the collective. All right, so let's give you a real-world example. Let's talk about the COVID pandemic, okay? The pandemic. Now, you might think that Americans were anti-mask and anti-vaccination and anti-this, that, and the other. That's not the case. What they were is anti-being told what they have to do. Okay? So you have to wear a mask. You can't tell me I have to wear a mask. You need to get vaccinated. You can't tell me I have to get vaccinated. Americans are almost hardwired to bristle against anything that they're being told they need to do in support of the collective. It's best for the community as a whole if you get vaccinated. I'm worrying about me. I'm not worrying about the community as a whole. Okay? China was just the opposite end of the spectrum. China, they held on to the pandemic regulations longer than anyone else. And they were basically imprisoning people in their apartments for weeks on end. You could not leave your apartment. You could not walk your dog. You could not go and get food. You could not visit with people. They were under house, entire cities, entire regions. If there was one instance of COVID identified, they'd put the whole city under house arrest. These are the extremes, okay? Now, of course, we all made it through, including the Chinese and including the Americans. But in the United States, if somebody tells us we have to do something, we tend to bristle against it, right? So this is something to consider when communicating. Sarah says, it depends on what state you are in with COVID regulations. Our California plant protested the vaccine while the Utah plant didn't like it, but complied with getting the vaccine. Great example. So it's interesting. Utah's a different animal. On one hand, Utahns are very conservative and individualistic. On the other hand, Utahns, by and large, speaking in aggregate, are obedient to authority. So when authority says you should do something, Utahns, by and large, are obedient to authority, but they're also very conservative and individualistic. Californians are more liberal, by and large, and individualistic, but they're also much more, individualistically radical. I can make my own decision. I can do my own thing. If I want to dye my dog purple, I can dye my dog purple. I want to express myself. Where's that hippie commune that Lon grew up in? Let me to it, right? So interesting how this goes from state to state. That is an excellent point. Surprised me we didn't protect it on our plant since we're more conservative here. Yeah. We're more obedient to authority for the most part. Not all of us. Well, individualism as a type of selfishness, yes and no. Yes and no. So, Brittany, from our previous class, the question is, do you exist for the state or does the state exist for you? In other words, is the whole community and the economy and infrastructure that we put together, does it exist to enable us to live our best lives and to self-actualize? Or do we exist simply to keep the collective and so forth in place? So I hear what you're saying, but individualism is also what inspired many of us to fight for different rights, to say, I have a right to this. You mentioned marriage before and so forth. That's individualism. That's saying, I have an individual right to do this. You as the collective don't have a right to tell me I can't. It all depends on how we cut it, right? Right? Yes and no for that too. Yeah, This is why, guys, everyone, just real quick, this is why I often say there is no right answer, because it all depends on the vantage point that you have. So, okay, let's keep going. Masculinity versus femininity. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry that Hofstede chose to call this masculine and feminine, because masculine and feminine are loaded words. We tend to think masculine, and feminine. No, I'm sorry he chose these words. Here's what it really comes down to, all right? Masculine-oriented countries tend to be ego-oriented, put money first, and fight for higher pay, and don't want to fail in any circumstance. Failure is not an option. Whereas a more feminine country is more relationship-oriented, quality of life comes first. They want more free time, and failure is just a part of life. And so I will say, in my own history, just to share with you my own vantage point, I think I spent the first 30 years of my life really in that masculine world of trying to make money and ego-oriented and so forth. I think the last 15 years, definitely 10 years of my life, I'll say 15, has been me working more toward that feminine side. I want better relationships. I want quality of life first. I want more free time. And failure is just part of the process, right? So if we come back up here, Japan is a very masculine country. Oh my gosh. Okay. As I said, I lived there a couple of years. Hofstein has it as a 95 out of 100. But then you take France. France is a 43. France is far more feminine. All right. Now, I lived in France as well, and I was struck by how laissez-faire, which is a French term meaning just let it be, how laissez-faire everyone was. They would come into work late, they would leave early. Lunch is the most important meal of the day in France, and they would take long lunches, and they would take them out at the park, or they would go to museums, they would go to music and so forth. I am not kidding about this. You can look it up. In France, in many areas, it is illegal to eat lunch at your desk. Look it up. Now, illegal, different terminology, misdemeanor, or whatever. Point is, it is so important to the French that you spend your lunchtime, which is it's like an hour and a half long, 2 hours long, building relationships with people and going out and getting away and being a person rather than an employee, that it's just plain illegal to eat your lunch at your desk. Whereas in the United States, I don't know that I ever ate lunch anywhere other than my desk. Okay, so that's kind of masculine, feminine. Two more. Uncertainty avoidance. No, three more. To what degree can you deal with ambiguity? Degree of which people in a country prefer structure over unstructured situations, defining uncertainty avoidance. United States is at 46. We, by and large, don't dig uncertainty. Wild, and I want that kind of respect for humans in America. Yeah, and I want to work toward that as well. By the way, that's another great thing. Okay. Uncertainty avoidance. Let me give you an example. So in the assignment, you're going to put together a strategic communications campaign. It's going to include a strategic communications plan. I have given you a video. The video goes through every aspect of the plan. It talks about the plan directly. I give you a sample plan. I give you examples of what other students have done. I give you lots of options on what you can do. I give you all kinds of stuff. And somebody is going to come to me and say, how many words should the plan be? And just so you know, here at home, I'm going to write a really nice email to you. I'm going to say, hey, I understand. Remember, it says in the syllabus that words are not important. It's, you meet the expectation. But here at home, I go like this. I go, oh my gosh. That is discomfort with uncertainty. Many students want to know how many words, how many pages, what is the rubric, where is a template? Can you give me an example? This is an unease with uncertainty. And Americans, by and large, we're at 46. We're not totally good with uncertainty. Japan lives in uncertainty. They have no problem with uncertainty. In fact, in Japanese, even the language they use is imbued with uncertainty. Yeah, Brittany, right? 800,000. Actually, the books. It's really funny, Brittany. So you know NaNoWriMo, right? I know you know NaNoWriMo. They even say 50,000 words. That's the goal. We like those kind of parameters, that structure. Okay, we're just going to keep going here. Get through this. I did it 3 times. Long-term versus short-term orientation. This is where the United States sucks the most. We are extremely short-term thinkers, okay? We think in the short term. We think in terms of quarterly earnings reports. We're thinking in terms of the numbers this month. We are really thinking in finite terms. Whereas in China and Asia in general, they think out decades in advance. Decades, right? And so I would see this in the workplace. I would be meeting with a project team with my Asian counterparts. And I'd say in a project team, I'd say, okay, here's the project. It's going to be a 9-month project and so on and so forth. However, we need some quick wins. Is there any low-hanging fruit quick wins? Because here in America, our stakeholders, the people who would fund this project and champion the project, they need some wins. They need some things that they can say, okay, we're making progress and so forth. And so we wouldn't think 9 months down the road. We would think low-hanging fruit, quick wins to deliver to our stakeholders so the stakeholders would continue to fund the project. This would drive our Chinese partners crazy because they're like, what are you doing thinking 2 weeks? This is a 9-month project. We need to be thinking about the end. And they were right. But then we would say, yeah, but if we don't think about 2 weeks, there won't be 9 months because our American stakeholders will pull the plug on us in a moment, and that would drive them bonkers. And they were right. So there you go. Okay, last one. Indulgence versus restraint. The degree to which society indulges or restrains the basic and natural human drives related to enjoying life and having fun. America is 68. We kind of like things right away. We are not totally awesome at restraining ourselves. Now, we're not awful. 68 is high. It's not, in the 70s or 80s or 90s, but still. Whereas, once again, China and many other Asian countries, they can restrain themselves. They can think in advance and withhold a pleasure today to have a greater payoff tomorrow. Lack of patience for the process of development is so aggravating in the U.S. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay, so folks, I think what we're going to do is this now. We do have, let's finish on culture shock. And then we're going to cover the rest of this next week. But I want to finish on culture shock. We all work with different cultures. And don't just think about cultures in terms of international. Okay, so we have some international folks with us, born in other countries. But then we also have different people in terms of where they're from in the United States. California, New Jersey, Utah, Midwest, Southern, and my wife is from the South and so forth. Different cultures, as you're mentioning, Sarah, moving from California to Utah was a culture shock. We also have lifestyles where we don't always understand one another, or even political parties where we don't understand each other. What we're going to talk about in terms of culture shock can be applied to any cultural phenomena, right? Okay, so here's how culture shock works. And you've all experienced it. Here's how it works. First of all, I know you don't think this consciously, but you think this subconsciously. We kind of expect everyone to be like us. We expect everyone on the road to drive like us. We expect everyone in a movie theater to behave like us. We expect students and so forth to do things the way that, well, this is how it's done. We even expect people to dress more or less like everyone else. I can't look at you right now, but I guarantee you're all dressed pretty much the same. Or when you go out, you will be. You will be wearing black, gray, some white. A couple of you will have blue jeans on. And there, I just described the dress of 80% of you. I'm right. Because that's the way it is. We kind of follow these trends. We follow these norms. We expect people to be like us. Okay. But the thing is, of course they're not like us. And so when somebody behaves in a way that runs counter to what we think they should be like, a cultural divide occurs, okay? And again, we see it in dress. We see it in wearing pantaloons and a hoodie. Hoodies. Half of you are in hoodies, all right? Especially when you go out. Although it's getting hotter now, so we won't see as many hoodies. But I wear hoodies too. So we have a cultural divide that occurs. You're late, you're early, you eat with your mouth, you talk with your mouth full, you don't talk with your mouth full, you use pronouns, you don't use pronouns, you're like, oh, Trump he was screwed by the courts. Oh, it's about time Trump got what he wanted, what he deserved, and so there are many levels of cultural divide. Many levels of cultural divide, not just international. And so we feel this stuff all the time. And when we feel it, it causes an emotional reaction. Let me show you what I mean. I mentioned pronouns. Half of you kind of went, Ooh, are we going to go there? I mentioned Trump. Half of you went, oh, yeah, right, he was totally screwed. And the other half was like, oh my gosh, I hope they throw him in jail. We have an emotional response when there is a cultural divide. Okay? By the way, everything here, totally normal. Totally normal. Okay? So any emotion that you're feeling right now, whether it's anger, fear, disrespect, this is normal. What we're about to cover is what we get to decide. So there are two routes we can go. Let me first show you the bad route to go. The first one is we create a false attribution about their behavior. In other words, we look at their behavior and it causes us fear, anger, disrespect, confusion, annoyance. And so we make crap up on why they do this. Well, they're kind of an uneducated people. Or, well, they're a backwards people. Or they're kind of a dirty people. Or, that's kind of a third world country. And, well, they really haven't moved much past the Bronze Age. We say these awful things to justify in our minds why we're feeling what we're feeling. Because obviously they're wrong. The way to do it is the way we do it. And since they're not doing it the way we do it, then prima facie, they're wrong. And there's got to be a reason they're wrong. And it's because they're kind of gross, dirty, backwards, hillbilly idiots. We all know that. Remember, this is the wrong way to go. And so what that does is we totally discount them as people and we withhold engagement. We don't have anything to do with them. We don't even view them as fully intelligent people. We see them as something broken or immoral or gross. And so we just don't engage. This you've seen and perhaps have done. I have done. You've seen this many times. And we hear it in the public discourse. You certainly hear it in social media. Okay, this is the way you shouldn't go. Let's talk about the way you should go with culture shock. Remember, you're totally allowed to feel anger, fear, disrespect. That's normal. So then what do you do with that? Well, first, become aware of your reaction. Just pause a moment and go, okay, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? I'm feeling kind of a disdain for the person. I disagree with what they're doing. I think it's kind of ridiculous. Oh, okay, it makes me feel threatened because they're doing something that I wouldn't do. And it causes me to wonder, are they right? Am I right? And I don't like the idea that I'm not right. So I feel this need to attack. Be aware of your feelings. Be aware of your feelings. Okay, that's the first step. Second step is reflect on the causes. Well, now, why do you feel these feelings? Now that you know what you feel, why do you feel them? Well, because my father always taught me this is the way to do it, and I kind of feel like he was right, and it seems to me that that's the right way to go, but I also see this, and so you kind of, where's the basis of your foundational beliefs, right? What is the basis of your values that's causing you to feel these feelings, right? Your first knee-jerk reaction, Brittany, is what you've been conditioned and trained to react. Yes, and reflecting on the causes is reflecting on that conditioning and training, right? Absolutely. Not necessarily your true self. Sarah says, we're going through a cultural shock right now with my work. We got bought. Oh, yes. If you got acquired, yes. We got bought by a bigger company, and they're trying to set us up different standards that don't sit well with people. This is a perfect example of culture shock in the workplace. I remember, you won't remember this. This is before your time, but Chrysler was bought by Chrysler being an American car company, was bought by a German car company called Daimler. And Daimler actually made Mercedes and so forth. This was before your time. And the Daimler-Chrysler, relationship did not work well. And there was this joke around town, which was, how do you pronounce Daimler-Chrysler? And the answer is Daimler. The Chrysler is silent. So yeah, kind of what you're going through. All right, so we reflect on the causes. Very good, people. Very good. And then let your reaction subside. Brittany said it well. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Just let your reaction subside. You understand the feelings that you feel, and you've kind of evaluated your training and your cultural indoctrination and why you feel these feelings. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just saying you now understand the root of them. Let the reaction subside. Sleep on it. Let cooler heads prevail. Then, observe and decode the differences in the situation. Okay, now we kind of take a clinical approach to it. We look at the culture. We look at why they do what they do. We try to better understand. We decode what is being said and done and find the differences and so forth. And when you do this, it's kind of extraordinary. You start to realize we're not that different. There's this YouTube channel. I've only watched a few of them because, frankly, it's a little ugly. They're trying to be funny, and they actually are funny, but they're being funny on an ugly topic, and I don't truck with that. But it basically says that this YouTube channel says, take woke to the extreme and take racist conservative to the extreme, and they both believe the same thing. Now, I disagree with that premise, but the point is, the more you observe and decode why somebody is doing what they're doing, the more you start to understand it. So, for example, when Sarah was saying that in California, they're like, I'm not going to get vaccinated, and in Utah, they adopted the vaccination, and you think, that sounds bass-ackwards, because Utah is more conservative than California. Yeah, but California is more, liberal, individualistic. I live my own life. I make my own rules. Whereas Utah is a little bit more, we obey authority. And so when you start to examine why people do what they do, it becomes enlightening. And when we have become enlightened, that allows us to develop culturally appropriate expectations. This doesn't mean that you change your mind. It doesn't mean that you change how you do things. It does mean that you accept this cultural difference and just say, difference is the spice of life. This is what makes life interesting. Thank goodness we're all different so that we can enrich one another. I don't agree with what you're doing, but I'm actually grateful that I live in a world where we can do what we think is right. And, I forget which political philosopher, said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. I forget who said that. But we develop culturally appropriate expectations. That way, when we run into these cultural things in the future, we don't go into shock. We just kind of go, I'll be damned. There it is again. Okay, that's fine. That's cool. So yeah, and you go through this all the time. I go through this all the time. There's many things in our culture that I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't go with that. But I don't think poorly of the person who does it because I have observed and decoded their values and their objectives, their intent, and I go, oh, I can get behind your intent. I'm with you there. So there you go. There's culture shock. When we come back next week, we are going to do a deeper dive into audience. We're going to talk about generations. I actually wanted to talk about generations today, but we are just about out of time, and I do not want to fly through generational differences. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get into some deeper stuff. Otherwise, you are all set. You've got some big team projects due this week. You've got your purpose statement and you have your team charter. One of the teams, at least, has already done this and they did a superb job. And so get onto that. Brittany, I'm glad this worked well for you. Hey, do me a favor, everyone. Send me an email saying that you were here and you participated. Because if you're here and you participated, you get the points. If you didn't participate yet, go ahead and throw in the comments real quick what part of the lecture kind of made you go, the most. All right, just something that you took away. That way you can say you participated. All right. Otherwise, that's it. We're all done. I'm going to stick around in case you have any questions or anything. But yeah, you're set. Get with your teams, finish the assignments, and we will catch you next time. And Sarah, thank you very much. Brittany, thank you. I deeply appreciate your participation today. And yeah, I'll stick around to see if there are any questions I can help you with. I moved my chair and I didn't need to move my chair that much. All right, there we go. Hey, thank you, Joseph. All right, well, I see people dropping off and looks like no additional questions. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.